This story will tell about a guy who thought one joke could never change his life. Ryan woke up that morning like any other teenager. The sun filtered softly through his bedroom blinds, the alarm on his phone buzzing quietly on the nightstand. He stretched, yawned, and picked up the device that had become a second limb, his connection to the world, his friends, his distractions. It seemed harmless, ordinary, until it wasn't. He created a fake screenshot, a small, seemingly innocent joke, a little alteration to a conversation with a classmate. He didn't think it through. He laughed, sent it to a friend. That's it. Nothing serious, no harm intended. But as the hours passed, Ryan's joke escaped the boundaries of his chat. It spread faster than he could imagine, copied, forwarded, altered. Suddenly it wasn't his alone. It became something bigger, darker, and unmanageable. When the adults got involved, Ryan had no time to react. The doorbell at the house, the police at the front steps. The cold, professional voice telling him he had to come along. For the first time, he felt a fear that was sharp and concrete. It wasn't panic yet. It was the shock of understanding that his life had tilted in a direction he could not control. The station smelled of bleach and anxiety. Other teens waited, some crying, some stiff with disbelief. Ryan tried to explain, to tell them it was just a joke, that he didn't mean it, that he didn't understand the severity. But in a place that deals in evidence and procedure, intentions were irrelevant. His phone was evidence. The screenshot was evidence. He now was a statistic in a case file. When the cell door clanged shut behind him, a metallic echo resonated in his chest. For a second, he thought it was a mistake. It had to be. Someone would explain. Someone would see that he was just a kid. But the lock clicked, and reality struck harder than any words could. The cell was small, cold, unwelcoming. The bench was hard. The walls smelled of damp and years of confinement, and the light was too bright to soothe but too dim to feel comfortable. Other inmates were there, some silent, some whispering, some staring blankly at walls that had seen countless mistakes before his. Ryan sat down and felt a sensation he never thought he would. Fear as a physical weight pressing against his chest, making it hard to breathe, making him feel insignificant. His mind kept replaying the moments leading here. The laughter, the carefree click of send, the assumption that nothing could touch him. The lesson was cruel and immediate. Freedom isn't guaranteed. It isn't permanent. One moment, one small decision can change everything. Time became irrelevant. Minutes stretched, then hours, blending into a haze of counting heads, listening to footsteps and adjusting to the constant tension in the air. Ryan noticed the subtle hierarchies, the silent rules, the weight of glances. Here, even innocence had a even price. Even the smallest action could be interpreted as defiance or weakness. Night came, or at least what passed for night in the cell. The light never truly went out. Shadows moved like specters across the walls. Every cough, every footstep, every distant shout made him flinch. Sleep was fragmented. Dreams were intrusions of what he had lost. The bedroom, the school, the friends who laughed with him, unaware of the consequences of a single click. By the third day, Ryan began to understand the subtle terror of confinement. It wasn't the punishment itself. It was the constant reminder that his choices had repercussions beyond what he could imagine. One moment of thoughtless humor had propelled him into a world where every action mattered, where survival depended on vigilance, and where freedom was a memory that seemed almost mythical. The screenshot, once a joke, now haunted him like a shadow he couldn't escape. He watched the other inmates, their eyes carrying stories of mistakes, poor decisions, and lost time. Some were hardened, some resigned, all aware that nothing here came without cost. Ryan felt the first real stirrings of understanding, that life outside the walls could never feel the same, That one careless moment could define more than just a day. It could define years. He lay on the narrow bed, staring at the ceiling. A part of him wanted to cry, but the harder, quieter part, the part that would survive, began to emerge. He realized that he couldn't undo what he had done, but he could begin to learn from it. The lesson was painful, but undeniable. Every action has consequences, often far beyond what you see. And as the dim light flickered overhead, Ryan whispered to himself a thought he would carry long after the first night. One mistake can change everything, but the understanding of that mistake can shape the rest of your life. The next morning, Ryan woke to a world that felt entirely alien. The sunlight, when it came through, the narrow window was pale and cold. The sounds of the prison, metal doors slamming, boots echoing down the hall, the murmur of other inmates, were constant, relentless, and unforgiving. Every noise made him jump. Every movement required attention. The freedom he had taken for granted outside had vanished, replaced by an awareness that even a single misstep could cost him dearly. Breakfast was a silent, tense affair. Ryan carried his tray carefully, glancing only briefly at others around him. A wrong look could provoke a fight. A misstep could mark him as weak. He quickly realized that everyone here was observing, calculating, and testing just as he was. He was no longer a kid joking on his phone. He was a number in a system that demanded vigilance at all times. The first real challenge came in the form of hierarchy. Some inmates were older, tougher, and experienced. They moved with confidence, their eyes always scanning, their presence a silent warning to anyone who might appear naive. Ryan tried to shrink into the corner of the room to become invisible, but invisibility here wasn't guaranteed. His first accidental glance toward one of them earned a hard stare, and Ryan froze, heart pounding, realizing instantly that attention, even unintended, could be dangerous. Time in the cell had a strange elasticity. Minutes stretched and twisted, days blended into each other, and the outside world felt impossibly distant. Ryan began counting not hours but small patterns. The cadence of guards' footsteps, the way one inmate tapped his foot before meals, the slight nods that signaled dominance or submission. Observation became a survival tool. He learned quickly that mistakes here were not forgiven lightly, and that fear was always a step behind him, ready to become real pain at any moment. Nightfall was worse than the day. The dim light never went out, casting elongated shadows that seemed to creep along the walls. Sleep was fragmented. Every sound, a cough, a shuffle of feet, a distant shout, jolted him awake. Ryan discovered a new kind of fear, one that was constant and physical, pressing on his chest and weighing on his limbs. It wasn't panic. It was something deeper, a hollow awareness that one wrong action could escalate beyond his control. He began to think about the screenshot constantly. That single click, which had felt meaningless in the safety of his room, now haunted him in every moment of confinement. Every laugh, every moment of carelessness outside seemed like a lifetime ago. He saw now that even a small act could ripple outward, touching lives, creating consequences he had never imagined. Ryan also started noticing the people around him. Some were hardened by years of mistakes, others by choices like his own, some simply unlucky. None of them laughed easily. Many spoke in whispers, measured every word, moved with purpose. Ryan realized that survival here wasn't about strength or rebellion. It was about awareness, patience, and understanding the invisible rules of a place designed to strip you of certainty. He began to internalize a new rhythm, a new discipline. Each day he counted, observed, adjusted. He measured not just actions but reactions, learning to anticipate consequences. The impulsive boy who had sent a harmless joke no longer existed. He was being replaced by someone who understood the weight of every choice, who could feel the price of freedom with each breath. By the end of the second week, the reality hit him fully. There was no quick explanation that could undo what had happened. There were no shortcuts. The world outside, the laughter, the school, the ordinary life, it had moved on. He had been pulled into a world that demanded attention, respect, and constant self-awareness. Every small detail mattered, and ignorance had a price. Ryan lay on his narrow bed, staring at the cracked ceiling, feeling the weight of isolation pressing down on him. The first pangs of true regret started to form. Not just for the joke, not just for the screenshot, but for underestimating the world outside, for believing that actions had no consequences. He was learning painfully and relentlessly that freedom was fragile, that mistakes mattered, and that one moment could change everything. That night he whispered to himself almost inaudibly. He would survive, he would learn, and he would never take the ordinary for granted again. The lessons had begun, and he knew they would last far longer than the days he counted behind these walls. By the third week, Ryan was no longer simply reacting to the environment. He was learning to navigate it. Each day brought subtle tests he hadn't anticipated. A glance that seemed too long, a whisper that could be interpreted as mockery, a tray taken slightly out of order. He noticed how the older inmates moved with purpose, how they subtly signaled power without saying a word, how silence could intimidate as much as aggression. Every observation became a lesson in survival, every mistake a risk he couldn't afford. One afternoon, tension finally erupted in a confrontation. Another inmate, taller and broader, blocked Ryan's path while he carried his tray. There was no reason, just a random challenge, a test of nerves. Ryan froze, his pulse pounding, realizing instantly that a single wrong reaction could escalate into a fight he wasn't prepared for. The man's eyes drilled into him, searching for weakness. Ryan's mind raced, recalling every lesson of observation, every subtle pattern he'd memorized. Slowly, deliberately, he stepped aside and avoided eye contact, letting his body speak compliance instead of defiance. The other inmate let him pass, grunting in what Ryan imagined was frustration. But the encounter left him shaken. He realized that in this world, understanding the invisible rules wasn't optional. Survival required constant awareness, calculation, and restraint. The boy who had acted impulsively, who had laughed at a harmless joke, was gone, replaced by someone learning the cost of every action. Back in the cell, Ryan reflected on how quickly life could shift. A joke, a click, and suddenly the world he knew had disappeared. Now each moment was measured, calculated, weighted. Sleep remained difficult. Every creak of the building, every distant shout, every cough felt amplified, each sound a potential signal of trouble. Fear had become constant, a physical presence pressing against his chest and limbs. Isolation was as much psychological as physical. He noticed the quiet glances of his cellmates, the way they observed him as much as he observed them. Conversations were rare, cautious, careful. Trust didn't exist here, only survival. He realized that the prison didn't merely punish mistakes, it reshaped them, magnified them, turning lessons into lifetimes of awareness. During quiet moments, Ryan began thinking about freedom differently. It wasn't just about leaving the cell or walking outside, it was about knowing its value. Every moment outside had been taken for granted. The warmth of sunlight, the laughter of friends, the sound of ordinary life. He understood now that these small things were extraordinary, fragile, and easily lost. The mistake that landed him here had taught him what ordinary life was truly worth. By the end of the week, Ryan also noticed the subtle changes within himself. He spoke less, observed more, measured every word and gesture. Impulsiveness had no place here. Awareness became his armor. The lessons were harsh, unrelenting, and often invisible, but they were shaping him in ways he hadn't expected. He began to feel the first traces of resilience, a quiet internal determination that he would endure, that he would learn from this, and that he would not allow one mistake to define the rest of his life. Ryan realized painfully and clearly that the prison didn't just punish actions. It punished inattention, naivety, and assumption. Every choice mattered, every reaction was scrutinized, and every moment could ripple far beyond what he could see. He had begun to understand that survival here required not just caution, but patience, observation, and a deep awareness of consequences. As he lay on his narrow bed that night, staring at the cracked ceiling and flickering light, Ryan whispered to himself a promise he didn't fully understand yet. He would remember, he would learn, and he would not forget the cost of a single careless moment. The nights were the worst. The dim light in the cell never fully went out, casting long, shifting shadows that seemed to move with a life of their own. Sleep came in broken fragments, never enough to reset his mind. Every noise, a footstep, a door clanging, a cough from across the hall, made Ryan startle, his body tensing automatically. Fear had become physical. It was pressing against his chest, weighing on his arms, making each breath a conscious effort. It was relentless, unyielding, and completely inescapable. He found himself counting things obsessively. The seconds between guard shifts, the steps of someone walking in the corridor, the number of times an inmate shifted in their bed. Patterns became a lifeline, a way to anchor himself in a world where uncertainty ruled everything. He realized quickly that even one missed cue could be dangerous. A glance in the wrong direction, a laugh at the wrong time, a hesitation in movement, all could carry consequences far beyond what he was capable of imagining. The small moments that had seemed insignificant outside now felt monumental. A glance at a friend, a joke, a text message, they had the power to alter his life entirely. That one screenshot, once a fleeting joke, had unraveled the normal rhythm of his world, dragging him into a place where nothing was safe and every decision mattered. Ryan began to understand the true weight of responsibility. He could no longer pretend that actions were harmless. He had been taught that lesson in the most unforgiving way possible. Conversations with other inmates were rare and measured. Trust was non-existent. Everyone here moved with caution, aware of the invisible rules that governed behavior. Ryan observed them, learning more from their silences than their words. Some were hardened by years behind bars, others were young like him, naive and terrified. Every person carried their own mistakes, their own stories of how a single choice had led them here. And he realized that while he had made a mistake, he had been lucky enough to live long enough to understand its consequences. Isolation was another teacher. It forced him inward, confronting thoughts and feelings he had never allowed himself to examine. Regret, shame, fear, and self-recrimination swirled together, often leaving him paralyzed. He could replay the moment over and over in his mind, imagining what he could have done differently, wishing he could rewind time. But no amount of wishing could change the past. The walls didn't care about intent, and reality didn't bend for remorse. During long stretches of quiet, Ryan began noticing subtle patterns in himself. Impulsiveness was fading. Awareness had replaced it. Patience and observation became survival tools. He understood that survival wasn't about fighting or rebellion, it was about understanding, calculating, and anticipating. He had to be vigilant not only for danger, but also for the invisible lessons hidden in routine and silence. By the fourth week, Ryan's reflections had deepened. He thought about freedom differently now. Outside, he had taken it for granted, the sunlight, the laughter of friends, the comfort of home, the ordinary rhythm of daily life. Those moments had seemed mundane once, yet now he recognized their true value. Freedom wasn't just a right, it was a fragile state that could vanish in an instant. He had lost it, and it had been replaced by confinement, restriction, and the constant pressure of consequence. Even small victories became profound, making it through a day without conflict, noticing a pattern in guard behavior, surviving an unexpected encounter with another inmate. Each became a reminder that endurance was possible. Ryan understood that growth was occurring quietly, imperceptibly, but irrevocably. He was learning, in ways a classroom never could, the cost of a single careless action and the meaning of responsibility. He lay on his narrow bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling a strange mix of fear and understanding. This place had stripped him of comfort, laughter, and normalcy, yet it had also given him clarity. He finally grasped that survival depended not only on awareness of others but also on awareness of self. The impulsive boy who had laughed at a harmless joke no longer existed. In his place was someone observing, calculating, reflecting, someone who understood finally that freedom and choice are precious, fragile, and easily lost. And in the quiet hum of the cell, Ryan made an unspoken promise to himself. He would endure, he would learn, and he would carry the lesson of this place with him long after the walls were behind him. One mistake had changed everything, but the understanding of that mistake might shape the rest of his life. By the 5th week, the monotony of the cell had begun to twist into something sharper, a psychological pressure that gnawed at Ryan's mind relentlessly. The days were predictable, yet each one carried unseen dangers. Every glance, every sound, every movement of those around him felt like a potential trap. He had grown accustomed to the rhythms of the prison, but familiarity brought no comfort. Only a deeper awareness of how fragile his existence here was. One afternoon, a misunderstanding with another inmate escalated quickly. Ryan had accidentally taken a spot at the table that someone else considered theirs. A simple shrug, an innocent glance, and suddenly voices were raised. The man towering over him leaned close, eyes dark with challenge. Ryan froze, heart hammering. In that instant, he understood the brutal calculus of survival. One wrong reaction could mean bruises, threats, or worse. He remembered the joke that brought him here, the screenshot that seemed harmless. The irony was inescapable. He had laughed at nothing, and now every sound, every gaze, every small action held potential consequence. Fear wasn't enough anymore. It wasn't abstract. It had teeth. It was alive, and it whispered constantly, "One slip, one mistake, and you will pay." That night, sleep was impossible. He lay on the hard bed, staring at the ceiling, counting nothing, noticing everything. The shadows moved like living things. The soft noises of distant arguments or coughs became exaggerated, echoing in his mind. He felt every heartbeat as a reminder of how precarious his place was. Loneliness had transformed into a relentless companion, pressing him into introspection deeper than he'd ever experienced. Ryan began replaying the exact moment that led him here over and over. The laugh, the press of the send button, the casual assumption that his actions had no weight. He saw it from every angle, imagining how differently he could have behaved, how one small choice might have prevented everything. The regret was crushing, but within it lay the first flicker of understanding. That responsibility was inescapable, and that the world outside had consequences far beyond perception. It was during another quiet evening, as the lights flickered overhead, that Ryan realized something essential. Survival wasn't about avoiding punishment anymore. It wasn't just about hiding or calculating steps. It was about accepting the weight of actions and understanding their ripple effects. Each day was a lesson not in obedience, but in accountability, and he began to see that this harsh, relentless environment was teaching him what no classroom could: the price of carelessness. By the 6th week, Ryan noticed subtle changes in himself. He no longer reacted impulsively to the small provocations. He measured his tone, his expressions, his posture. The boy who had sent a thoughtless joke was gone. In his place was someone watching, learning, absorbing the realities of consequence and human behavior under pressure. It was exhausting mentally and emotionally, but it was survival in its purest form. And yet, despite the fear and isolation, there were moments of clarity that pierced the darkness. Observing others, he began to understand the patterns of behavior, the unspoken hierarchies, the strategies for enduring without provoking unnecessary conflict. Even small victories, navigating a meal without incident, avoiding a confrontation, became profound lessons in patience, caution, and self-control. That week, lying on his bed after another day of tension and observation, Ryan whispered a promise to himself. He would endure, he would absorb the lessons, and he would not allow the mistake that landed him here to define the man he would become. The prison had stripped away his illusions, forced him to confront fear, and expose the fragility of choices. But in doing so, it had also begun to forge something new inside him: understanding, caution, and a quiet resilience. By the 6th week, Ryan had begun to feel something shift inside him. It was subtle at first, a small spark of clarity amid the constant tension, a recognition that fear alone would not sustain him. He realized that survival in this place wasn't just about avoiding trouble or obeying invisible rules. It was about understanding himself, his impulses, and the consequences of every thoughtless action that had led him here. The cell had become both a cage and a mirror. Alone with his thoughts, Ryan confronted the choices that had brought him to this point. He remembered the casual laugh, the careless click of send, the assumption that nothing outside would matter. It seemed absurd now. A single joke had unraveled the fabric of his life. The isolation, the cold, the constant vigilance of prison life, all of it traced back to that one moment. And yet in that same reckoning he felt the stirrings of something new: accountability. For the first time, Ryan didn't just feel fear. He felt responsibility. It was heavier than any guard, any threat, any confinement. It was the weight of knowing that every action carries consequences far beyond what he could see, and that understanding them, fully, deeply, was the only way to survive with integrity intact. This understanding brought its own trials. Ryan began analyzing his behavior, questioning his instincts, replaying every interaction in the cell. He realized how easily tension could escalate, how misunderstandings could become violent, and how much he relied on observation and patience rather than impulsiveness. Each day became an exercise in mindfulness, in careful decision-making, and in learning the invisible rules of human behavior under extreme pressure. One night, an argument erupted over a trivial issue. A blanket moved the wrong way, a chair slightly misplaced. Ryan felt the old panic rising in his chest, but he stopped himself. Instead of reacting, he watched, waited, and then intervened subtly, diffusing the tension with a quiet word. The shift was small, but it was profound. He felt a spark of power that came not from force or intimidation, but from understanding, presence, and deliberate choice. He had learned to act with intention, not impulse. The days blurred, but Ryan kept noticing the growth inside himself. The fear that had once paralyzed him became a teacher, highlighting risks, shaping his thoughts, and guiding his actions. The loneliness, which had once been crushing, became a tool for reflection and self-examination. He discovered resilience he hadn't known existed, a quiet strength forged in the relentless pressure of confinement. Ryan also began to see the other inmates differently. No longer just threats or obstacles, they became lessons in human behavior. Each person carried a story, a mistake, a consequence. Observing them taught him empathy, caution, and a deeper understanding of how choices shape lives. He recognized that his own actions, small and seemingly harmless, had the potential to ripple outward in ways he had never imagined. By the end of the 6th week, Ryan's internal shift was undeniable. The impulsive, careless boy who had clicked send without thought was gone. In his place stood someone who understood the weight of his actions, the fragility of freedom, and the importance of accountability. He had learned that mistakes could not be erased, but understanding them could guide the rest of his life. As he lay on the narrow bed that night, staring at the flickering light and the shadows across the walls, Ryan whispered to himself a vow. He would carry the lessons of this place, the fear, the regret, and the understanding with him forever. He would endure. He would learn. He would emerge from this experience changed, not just surviving, but transformed. By the 7th week, Ryan had settled into a rhythm that balanced caution with awareness. He was no longer consumed entirely by fear, though it still lingered like a shadow in the corners of his mind. What had replaced panic was something more subtle. Focus. Every movement, every glance, every word was measured, calculated, observed. Survival had become second nature, and yet, for the first time, he began to notice the small victories. Tiny proofs that he could endure, adapt, and even control his own experience. A minor victory came during meals. The chaos of the dining area, shuffling trays, sudden outbursts, the constant jostling of bodies had once overwhelmed him. Now Ryan navigated it with a quiet efficiency. He anticipated movements, adjusted his pace, avoided conflict without drawing attention. It was a skill he hadn't realized he had developed, and the sense of competence, however small, sparked a fragile hope. Even interactions with other inmates began to shift. He noticed respect forming, subtle and unspoken, from some of the younger or less confident prisoners. They saw his careful patience, his calm observation, and in return they kept their distance. Not all were friendly, and danger still lurked, but Ryan understood that influence could come from restraint as much as from aggression. He had found a measure of power in awareness, a tool that no one could take from him, even behind these walls. The nights remained long and sleep was still fragmented, but Ryan had begun to control the panic that once gripped him. He used the quiet hours to reflect, plan, and reinforce the lessons of the past weeks. He visualized the outside world, not as a place of freedom taken for granted, but as a realm of responsibility, a canvas he had once ignored. Every day in the cell became preparation for the eventual return, an opportunity to internalize discipline, patience, and understanding. One evening, a small incident tested his new resolve. Another inmate, frustrated and volatile, attempted to provoke him into a confrontation. In the past, Ryan might have reacted impulsively, fear or anger guiding his movements. Instead, he stood still, measured, and let the aggression pass without escalation. The moment passed almost unnoticed, but internally Ryan recognized it as a triumph. He had mastered a piece of himself, restraint in the face of chaos, and the victory was intoxicating. In these small moments, hope began to blossom, not naive hope, but tempered, deliberate hope. Ryan understood that he could survive not just physically, but mentally and emotionally. The prison had taught him fear, patience, observation, and endurance. Now it was teaching him self-mastery. He could leave this place not broken, but changed, stronger, wiser, and aware of the consequences of every decision. He also began noticing the routines of the guards, the subtle shifts in the environment, the hidden rhythms of prison life. Where once everything seemed random and threatening, he now discerned patterns. He used them to navigate his days more safely, to avoid unnecessary conflict, and to plan small actions that would make life behind the walls more manageable. Each success, however minor, became a building block for confidence. By the 7th week, Ryan realized that while he couldn't undo the past, he could prepare for the future. His mistake had brought him here, but his growth would guide him forward. He understood that freedom wasn't just leaving the walls behind, it was carrying understanding, patience, and accountability into every decision beyond the prison gates. That night, as he lay on his narrow bed, a shadow stretching across the walls, Ryan allowed himself a small, quiet thought. Perhaps he could emerge from this place not just as a survivor, but as someone transformed. Someone who truly understood the cost of a single choice, the weight of responsibility, and the fragility of freedom. Weeks turned into months, and Ryan felt the weight of time pressing down differently now. The constant vigilance, the fear, the endless observation, they had shaped him into someone almost unrecognizable from the impulsive boy who had clicked send on that fateful screenshot. He moved with purpose, spoke cautiously, and measured every glance. The cell had become both a crucible and a classroom, forging lessons in patience, restraint, and understanding that could never have been learned elsewhere. The final days before his release were tense. Guards seemed sharper, the routines slightly altered, and the other inmates more restless. Ryan sensed a collective energy, a mixture of anticipation, anxiety, and tension. And he navigated it as he had learned, observing, calculating, and remaining calm. Every decision carried weight, every movement mattered. He had survived for months in this world by mastering the invisible rules, and now he realized that leaving would require a different kind of mastery. The mastery of reintegration. One afternoon, a minor confrontation erupted in the hallway. A younger inmate, frustrated and reckless, challenged a more experienced prisoner. Ryan stood nearby, silent, tense, heart pounding. He had the power to intervene, but he also knew the danger of impulsiveness. He waited, then subtly shifted, allowing the situation to de-escalate without attracting attention to himself. It was a small victory, but one that confirmed everything he had learned. Patience, observation, and calculated action could triumph over chaos. That evening, as he lay on his bed for the last night behind bars, Ryan reflected on everything: the fear, the loneliness, the sleepless nights, the constant tension. They had taught him something vital. Every choice mattered, and the consequences of carelessness could last far longer than the moment itself. He had come to understand responsibility in a way no outside lesson could have imparted. The impulsive boy who had joked without thought was gone, replaced by someone aware, deliberate, and resilient. Morning came, crisp and bright, and Ryan's name was called. The guards escorted him through the corridors he knew so well, each step a reminder of the months he had endured. Outside, the sunlight felt sharper, the air fresher, the world larger than he remembered. Freedom was no longer abstract or taken for granted. It was a tangible, fragile treasure. Each breath was an acknowledgement of its value. As he stepped beyond the gates, the city unfolded before him. Ordinary streets, ordinary people, ordinary life. Yet everything seemed extraordinary now. Ryan felt a mix of relief, gratitude, and solemn awareness. The experience had changed him fundamentally. The joke, the click, the screenshot, they had all led to this transformation, harsh as it had been. And then, as he walked away from the prison, something unexpected happened. A figure approached him, a fellow inmate he had watched quietly throughout his time inside. The man nodded, a brief acknowledgement of shared understanding. No words were exchanged. It was a silent confirmation. Survival was not just about leaving. It was about carrying the lessons, the vigilance, and the resilience forward. Ryan felt a strange, almost surreal clarity. The mistake that had once seemed catastrophic now felt like a teacher, harsh, unrelenting, but profoundly transformative. He had lost months of his life to impulsiveness, yes, but he had gained something far more enduring. Insight, self-control, and the understanding that one moment could define everything, for better or worse. As he disappeared into the streets of the city, free but forever changed, Ryan whispered to himself a truth that would guide him for the rest of his life. One mistake can change everything, but the lessons learned from that mistake can shape who you truly become. And for the first time in months, he felt something he hadn't expected. Not fear, not regret, but a quiet, unwavering sense of purpose.